This guy.
It's always good.
All right then, folks, are you ready? So I think that this panel is the last thing between all of you and awards and cocktails. And you have listened to lots of fantastic presentations about the thriving ecosystem for innovation that we have here in New Haven. And so we are all going to do our best to keep this feisty and interesting at the end of this conference. So our topic today is what are the challenges and opportunities that are unique to rare disease. And I'll start by introducing myself, and then I'll allow my fellow panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about each of themselves. I'm Sharon Barr. I'm the head of research and product development at Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease. The name says it all. We are focused on creating medicines for people with rare disease.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Pleasure to be here. It's great to see so many well-known faces. Martin Mackay, I had the privilege of working with Sharon at Alexion, career in pharmaceutical research and development, most notably at Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Alexion, where I led the R&D efforts. And then with Steve Uden and Jeff Fryer, launched Rally Bio, dedicated to rare disease at the beginning of 2018.
Hi, my name is Bill Harrington. I'm the managing partner at Osage University Partners. We are a venture firm located in Philadelphia and work in partnership with universities and research institutions investing in their spin-outs and licensees, really across the spectrum of anything you can imagine commercializing out of the university lab. I manage our life science activities, which is about 65% of what we do.
I wonder if yeah. Hi, everyone. Sylvia Tobe. I work at Omega Funds. We're a biotech VC firm based out of Boston, primarily focused on therapeutics. I'm a scientist by training, did my PhD at Harvard in synthetic biology, and then after that, I was one of the first employees at a company called Raw Pharmaceuticals. We were doing peptide drug discovery using mRNA display. And we worked at I ended up focusing our internal pipeline on rare diseases associated with complement dysregulation, which I think a few people here are quite familiar with. And so our lead program was a C5 peptide inhibitor that is now in the process of getting approved for myasthenia gravis in several countries. And we were acquired a few years ago by UCB for over $2 billion, so we did relatively well. And so since being with Omega, I've been primarily focused on early stage investments and company creation. We look at just about everything, all modalities, therapeutic areas, and stages of development and investment. And so obviously we see a lot of opportunities in the rare disease space and continue to be excited to invest in this space.
Great. Thanks to the organizers for having this terrific conference. I'm Leland Gershell. I'm a senior biotech analyst at Oppenheimer & Co., which is an investment bank. I'm based in New York City, not too far away. And we cover a number of companies that are developing or marketing therapeutics, including a number that are in the rare disease space, runs the gamut from gene therapy to other new technologies, and also your run-of-the-mill small molecules and biologics as well. And so in terms of just what I do, we work with public companies. We cover stocks that are public, and we opine on them for the benefit of institutional investors. We also get to know a number of private companies before they may come public, and then follow those companies once they're on the public markets.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Brennan. I'm a managing director at a venture fund called Vertex Ventures HC. It has nothing to do with the pharmaceutical company. We're not a corporate venture fund. We're an independent venture fund. We're funded via the large sovereign wealth fund out of Singapore called Temasek. We have a little over $500 million under management right now between 3 funds. Just launched our 3rd fund for $200 million. We invest 2/3 in biotech companies, so those are usually early but not company creation. It's usually Series A's, Series B's, so preclinical to early clinical. We also invest about 1/3 in medtech, and that has been mostly late stage, so FDA pivotal trials or even commercial and growth phases. My personal background is I've been in venture for about 9 years. I was at 2 different corporate venture funds before I joined this, so I did not help the whole Vertex confusion thing. But before that, I spent about 10 years in business development, both small biotech as a CBO, and then at Big Pharma for about 5 years in BD as well, originally a PhD and postdoc in neuroscience.
So Christine, it sounds like you've answered that Vertex question a couple of times.
Just a few. We're hoping the more I say it, eventually I can just say VVHC and everybody will know who we are.
So you can tell from the intros that we are a mix of inventors, developers, investors, and investors, former inventors. So I think you'll get a really great range of opinions on a variety of questions as we work through these opinions. As Leland pointed out, he likes to opine, so today is a great day to opine. So let's start with opining on the big question. What are the challenges and opportunities that you think are unique to rare disease? Sure.
Truly, I see many more opportunities, and you mentioned myasthenia gravis as the perfect example, actually. So when we ran the trial with eculizumab in your company, this was on a refractory population of myasthenic patients. Nobody had ever run a trial in refractory myasthenia gravis before. It's the first time. Now, when we're thinking about that area, people say it's crowded and it's competitive. We actually see that as a really good thing. What an opportunity after running a study and showing great evidence of efficacy and eculizumab being on the market for it, and other companies coming into the area to do even better because eculizumab doesn't work in every patient. That's where I see the opportunities, really. Tremendous medical need in so many rare diseases, and now science being applied to cracking those. So, the problems are tiny compared to me to the opportunities.
Does this work? Yes, it does. Yeah, we actually benefited really from, Alexion trailblazing there, especially for PNH, and that's where we went in the first place. I think for me, as an investor, one of the I'm a little bit distracted by the echo, sorry. One of the greatest opportunities for rare diseases that really applies specifically to venture investment is that because you have smaller populations, you have smaller trials that are typically much cheaper, and so companies can really fund their way, potentially all the way through approval without having to think about, partnering with a bigger player at some point down the road. And so I think that's probably why we tend to start there.
Yeah, I'll just add, absolutely, from a venture investor point of view, you can go into these clinical trials, even the early clinical trials, a lot of times getting early proof of concept in phase 1B, right? For other larger indications, you really have to be in phase 2, sometimes even phase 2B, before you really see proof of concept. So you can, especially if you're in a platform company, you can really pressure test that platform a lot faster, a lot quicker, a lot easier. And with rare diseases, a lot of times we know a lot more about the genetics behind the diseases. We know a lot more about the pathophysiology, not all the time, but a lot of times. And it really helps us in terms of trying to focus on where do we think a therapeutic is going to work. It's not like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease that are named after the physician who defined the disease in the 1800s, right? So there's not an Alzheimer's disease. There's a dude who named it Alzheimer's disease, and the disease itself, we still have to figure out what it really is and what the populations are. So in rare disease, we really have that ability, I think, to focus on getting to the clinic earlier and getting to those patients that we can better define in those clinical trials to really up our odds of success.
On your mention of those kind of big market disorders like Alzheimer's and so forth, one of the great things about small companies in biotech developing drugs for a rare disease, and this is coming from the public markets perspective, where investors may care more, or perhaps more about kind of the commercial landscape and the blocking and tackling one has to do to succeed with the drug on the market once it actually gets there, is that these are often markets that are without competition. So you're not going into hypertension with the 12th or 15th atherosclerosis with, maybe terrific drugs, maybe better, maybe differentiated from what's on the market already, but still there's always going to be that question of, well, how much marketing push and spend and effort, and, are there going to be others who are going to be able to sort of out-market or outspend you, who may be dominant in this space. But in the orphan and rare diseases, that tends not to be the case. Maybe that's becoming more and more of a challenge for some of these conditions that now have several drugs that are on the market or coming along, but has been kind of sheltered from that for the most part.
So I really appreciate your positive outlook, but I think this panel is going to be so much more fun if we disagree with each other, so I'll go first. This is true, right? There are tremendous opportunities in the rare disease space, but I don't want us to overlook the challenges. So Christine, you mentioned, what's really great is that we understand the biology. Actually, we don't always, right? In rare disease, let's just frame it out. Rare disease isn't rare. 1 in 10 people is living with a rare disease. Over 300 million people in the United States alone are living with rare disease. And of those people, more than half of them have a disease that has a genetic causality as its underpinning. More than half of them, more than 80% of them, are children. When there is a genetic underpinning, we begin to understand it, but not the totality of the disease. When we think about autoimmune diseases, like you both mentioned, MG, it is not as straightforward as a loss of function mutation. And so understanding what are the drivers and what are the passengers in that disease are unique challenges for inventors in the rare disease space. If you work in a different therapeutic area, like one of the larger market disorders or any subset of oncology, there is a lot of what I call freeware available to you. There are large data sets available to you. There are cell lines and animal models that are accessible to you on a commercial basis. In rare disease, that isn't true. You have to build your own cellular and animal systems. You have to identify your own biomarkers. You have to establish your own models of disease pathophysiology and hope that they are predictive of what you're seeing in the clinic. So it's true that there are opportunities, but I think we should also represent the fact that there are challenges, and you often have to spend more time understanding the disease itself and setting up the systems to create the therapeutic and test the therapeutic before you can get to a clinical trial.
Yeah, Sharon, I think that's right. Not only do we often not understand the biology at the level we think we do, but we often don't really understand the disease itself. And many of these diseases, the natural history, when you really dig into it as an investor, as we're doing our diligence, we're given incidence and prevalence and various data. And as we dig into it, we find out that there was one study done 50 years ago that has been published in every medical book and is referred to in every journal publication. And since then, a lot's changed. Demographics have changed, state of nutrition, supportive care has changed, and the natural history has, in fact, evolved as well. So I think for some of these diseases, we need to kind of back up and really try to understand exactly what the natural history is, because you're not doing placebo-controlled trials, so you really have to understand what the baseline is. Endpoints, you don't have 5 trials to look back on in the last 5 years to kind of assess endpoints. You've got to come up with those on your own. So, just as important as taking a scientific discovery and trying to get it into the clinic is understanding what that clinic really looks like.
Yes, I can't disagree with either of you, but I will counter your counter to your counter, okay? And it comes in the form of when you work in these rare diseases where nobody's worked before, you learn a lot quickly. And the fact that you have to craft the regulatory pathway, I'm thinking of one of our lead programs just now in fetal and neonatal alloimmune thrombocytopenia, we're going to have to really craft that regular. But that, to me, is a great opportunity to work with regulators rather than be given a document which says this is the way you're going to do it, which might have been 20 or 30 years old. So I see that, again, as an opportunity to really craft the way that you develop medicines for those diseases.
As much as I love to disagree with you, I can't.
Tap on that. I think we forgot to mention something quite basic here for people that are not really familiar, but I think there are also massive incentives on the regulatory and financial sides, that I think we are pretty comfortable with. But, the first one is you typically have very flexible interactions with the agencies. They want to work with you very early on and try to really help you refine your development path so that you can be as effective and as quick as possible. You have, orphan drug designation, fast track designation, rare pediatric disease designation, and so on, that also open up the door to, accelerated approvals and potential market exclusivity that is a little bit extended. To me, on the challenge side, especially for small companies, I really see the clinical development because diagnosis is often extremely complicated. The vast majority of those patients really take years to be diagnosed if they are ever diagnosed appropriately. So enrollment is very tricky. And then you have to deal with trial designs that can be a little bit complicated as well, especially with the agencies now moving away from single-arm trials. Running a placebo-controlled trial in an orphan population that's already extremely small, you have to split that in half. You have a lot of heterogeneity in the patients. And that can be almost unethical if you're going into pediatric populations. And so you see companies having to compromise between the requirements of the agencies that tell them you're going to have to run a placebo trial and the demands of the patients and the patients' advocacy groups to push the trial to be as short as possible. And that can be very complicated when you're trying to get a clear readout for your trial as well.
I think teeing off from what all three of you have been discussing is, the question of what are we looking for in these trials, right? So biomarkers, clearly that's usually a shorter, maybe easier way to go about getting data that could support, if not a full approval, then maybe an accelerated approval. But then again, you have to be very careful. Not only do you have to worry about, are these biomarkers ones that the agency will recognize as being ones that are valid to support the approval of a drug, particularly in indications for which there has never been a prior approval. Secondly, are these ones that are kind of measurable in the relevant population during the relevant time frame of their disease, and there's a lot of variation there that can kind of mess with your ability to show what should be a treatment effect with the drug. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, it may not show that. So I think the whole area of trial design with respect to what to look for, biomarkers, how to get to an approval without having to spend years and years collecting outcomes data, particularly when these are very small populations and often hard to find these patients to begin with. That's a very big topic that continues to be a challenge for those in this game.
Yeah, it is possible for us to design a clinical trial based on the standard guidelines that would involve every patient with that disease in the United States, which isn't a great overall plan for ultimately developing that drug. You mentioned that the great thing about working in rare disease is in a given disease, there may be no therapeutics and therefore no competition. But interestingly, I'm not finding that to be true. I'm finding that there are 4 or 5 companies all working on, for example, a gene therapy in a given indication, and it is a small population. Ultimately, I think this is great for patients because they will have the best therapeutic possible. But it may create a challenge for developing those therapeutics because we won't be able to read out on any one of those trials if they're competing against each other. And I think as a community, we might need to think more creatively about how we collaborate in the pre-competitive space so that we're doing the right thing for our patients.
Sure. I will come back to, though, I was given some feedback recently about I'm too positive about everything. If I think of all the challenges that have been raised compared to a patient having one of those conditions, it doesn't even come on the radar, right? And we have the opportunity in our companies or as investors to make a difference to their lives. That's why I'm so positive.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think every challenge, what's the phrase? Every challenge is a door that you can open and go through, right? Don't look at it as a challenge, right? All that kind of stuff. And it is true, but these are things that I think are really important. I mean, the most important thing for any, especially new biotech company to really think about is what indications are they going to go after. If you have certain biology or a new platform, you make or break your company really figuring out what are the indications that are the ones that we should do first, second, third. And I think it is true, how many people are in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy right now, myotonic dystrophy, right? So, I don't want to fund another company that's going into that because I don't know what's happening there. There's so many things right now that's in the clinic and we don't understand yet what's working and what isn't working. That's not attractive for me as an investor to put yet another one fighting for a small number of patients in clinical studies that we don't yet know are working. I mean, Sarepta aside. But, that is a really good point around, really how do we think about maybe being more collegial and in a pre-competitive manner to think about how do we share some of these patients, how do we share best practices for clinical trials, those interactions with the regulatory groups. It is really going to become even more and more of an issue as we have more companies facing the same problems and the same diseases.
Oh, no, please.
As investors, we often see platforms, kind of particularly what we do, we see platforms emerging from university labs and novel biology, and the first clinical indication is often a rare disease for all the reasons we discussed. It's much more accessible to a small company and venture investors with the idea that, hey, showing proof of concept in a rare indication, a rare disease indication, there are follow-on opportunities with the same biology that are much larger and potentially much more profitable and exciting for investors and the markets at large. But you know, you have to be really careful with that, because that original rare disease, I mean, maybe you'll be able to demonstrate some target engagement or evidence of target engagement, but indications 2, 3, and 4 are completely different diseases with all sorts of issues that you need to address. And it's not as simple as, hey, we turned over one card and it was a good one, so everything else is roses. It's really difficult, and be very thoughtful if you're going to go down that route.
Can I bounce on that? Yeah, I completely agree. I think for an early stage platform company, what you might be trying to do is very, very quickly generate data that validates your platform. And I think in that context, you might look at potential indications that are not maybe the most attractive from a commercial perspective, but that allow you to get to that proof of concept. And I completely agree that if you do that, you need to have a very clear line of sight of how quickly you're going to get there, what data you're going to generate, and is that going to be convincing enough for those investors and strategics you're trying to bring in. You can't, I don't think I would ever advise even a small company to go into late stage trials for an indication that's not commercially viable.
Sylvia, when we were chatting earlier in the week, you mentioned that rare disease is a proving ground for innovation, and it sounded like you were starting to talk about that. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly that. Is, you know, if you have a platform, you have a very limited amount of time to fund it and develop it to the stage where, you know, it can run on its own and you're building an internal pipeline. And people are not going to be, you know, throwing more and more capital at a technology that hasn't been, you know, validated at a minimal. And so if you have a new modality, a new technology, whatever it is, that is not, you know, a product in and of itself, you need to feed the system and you need to generate the data. And I think rare diseases are, you know, when there is, in those 50% that I say genetically defined, you know, it is pretty ideal for a gene therapy and siRNA approach, or something that's relatively straightforward from an intervention perspective, to kind of really leverage that and try to, you know, develop your platform. And I think, you know, something else I'm thinking about, perhaps a little bit off topic, but bringing in those collaborations are not only, you know, useful if you really want to build a solid, broad platform because of non-dilutive financing, but also because it might feed into developing your platform further. And we had a little bit of that happen at RISE. Yeah, I've had one of my old colleagues sitting right there. We had a collaboration with Merck. We worked on various programs, and one of them was PCSK9. And one of the overarching goals of the company was, one, we wanted to show that we could do with synthetic peptides what biologics could do in terms of potency and specificity, but with perhaps a better product profile. And two, we were really hoping would get to oral peptides. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to enrich our libraries in ways to get there. And the only place where we were able to do that was through the partnership with Merck, because perhaps there was a little bit less pressure on the timelines. We had a little bit more time to, you know, sort through the medchem and so on and get there. And so I think for a platform, thinking very strategically, how do I validate my technology itself? And I might use this indication that's not great, but it's going to happen quickly, and I'll have an early readout in the clinic. And then, you know, allow yourself to really grow your platform can be important.
I just want to add maybe one point, and this is sort of, one has to be opportunistic here because it doesn't crop up by no means every application, but drug repurposing for rare disease is actually a good opportunity because of the number of benefits that the FDA and the regulations provide the developer of a drug that may be old in the sense of a molecule that may be off patent, or maybe it was approved for another disorder and it's been on the market for a long time and it's generic. But if you develop that and maybe it's in a new formulation that may be better for whatever the condition may be, and that's approved, you do have the 7 years of orphan exclusivity. So even a old molecule that you didn't have to hire a team of med chemists to design an NCE de novo and go through all the preclinical and animal testing and the safety and so forth, you can get to market a little bit faster, often much faster, and still have the benefits of what is a proprietary product, at least for some amount of time.
And following that, do you want to explore the business model about how you would differentially price a molecule for a common disease versus a rare disease? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so pricing, is maybe more and more of a topic that's been coming up kind of across the landscape. I think what we're seeing with respect to pricing robustness in the face of a payer climate that's becoming tougher and tougher is what they really want to see are what are the actual metrics that you are improving. What are the importance of those metrics to the patient's well-being and health? Quality of life is something which comes up a lot here, right? So a number of the early orphan drugs were approved mostly on kind of quality of life benefits, like the early Genzyme products. I mean, those were certainly weren't extending lifespan or anything like that, but I think we're mostly kind of on QOL benefit. I think what we're seeing, more of today is stringency applied to what extent are improvements in quality of life as assessed perhaps via certain patient-reported outcome measures that are in the trials. If those PRO measures are validated and there's a correlation between improvements on those PROs and, improvements in the disorder itself, that's a much stronger argument to make for the payer once you're approved than just, saying, well, there's, improvements in quality of life, but that it kind of ends there. So I think that's a very important point to make. Another thing to also say is that, as the market has become more competitive, there are certain products that are going to be favored, perhaps on the safety side as much as the efficacy side. And I think there's maybe more emphasis being placed now on products that may come to market around the same time, or if there's a group of products for the same indication where there are definite safety advantages to one over the other, then payers are going to, favor those, if efficacy is kind of head to neck and neck. And that wasn't as much of an issue maybe in the prior era, but I think that's more of a more operative today.
I'm going to try and pull two things together, the pricing and the repositioning piece. In terms of repositioning, it has definitely happened in rare disease where old molecules have been used. I can think of precious few that make a transformative difference to the patient. They're usually symptomatic treatments. Pricing's much easier if you can transform the life of the patient. And so if you're having to go to pricing committees with a medicine that's kind of okay, you're going to run into enormous problems. Even when it's transformative, it's pretty hard, but at least you've got some really sound clinical data. So the repositioning thing worries me a wee bit, just because of the history. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense.
I was kind of hoping that you would be a little more indignant.
Okay, I'll be indignant. Well, I mean, look, I think one of the things about repositioning that is an advantage is that, you can still have a drug that performs very well for a disorder that doesn't have anything approved for it, even if it's a drug that's been around for a long time. But again, it's like anything else, it's hit or miss.
Yes.
So, I covered this one company, it's a little tiny company called Soleno, and they have a drug which is an extended release form of a very old molecule its only approval is that of an oral suspension for hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia, but they're actually kind of past phase 3 for Prader-Willi syndrome. Yes. If that works in their randomized withdrawal study, which is coming up in the next couple months, that could be transformative for the PWS community.
Yes. So. Yeah, I don't knock it for the patient. I think for the patient, an incremental benefit's great. I mean, our industry's lived on incremental benefits for decades. Where I knock it is to try and get premium pricing then for something that doesn't work as well.
And then just to throw in, maybe, sorry, Bill, you were probably going to say the same thing, but just to throw in from the investor's point of view, a repositioned, repurposed drug is really hard for us to fund. Even though there's exclusivity, it takes longer than 7 years sometimes to get it to the point that shows in enough patients that it's working. And now you've eaten away a lot of time. And it's always better for us to say, if you have something that's repurposed and you think that you have something that could work, it's great, show it that it can work, and then do a new NCE, and then that has the kinds of patent life that we can much easier back as a venture fund.
Fortunately, the orphan protection begins at approval, so you don't lose the time during the R&D stage. But
it's not necessarily enough to actually recoup what we have to put in, even to just get it through that phase 3, right? If you have to put in $100 million, but you only have 7 years and you recoup 50, that's not gonna, that anybody's math, that doesn't work.
I also think that given some of the profound insights in biology that have, profound impacts on patients, almost curative in some cases, that's where I think we see the real upside as investors.
Yes.
Incremental benefit really matters if you're the patient benefiting incrementally, but as an investor with a broader kind of population-based approach, having a transformative effect is something that we have as a hurdle for us to get involved.
I'll just add one thing, is that I think in the rare disease space, you also have to be careful on the adoption side of something that is only bringing incremental benefit, because a lot of those patients have, existing therapies that might not be ideal, but they've organized their entire lives around that, and kind of like displacing those existing therapies might be very difficult. And I'm thinking in particular of, enzyme replacement therapies that have a lot of limitations, but the patients are very used to them, kind of reassured by their treatment. And so if you come in with a new modality or a new approach that is trying to displace that, you really need to have a very high clinical differentiation. And I think that's especially the case for, more challenging modalities that might be more difficult to implement, like gene therapy and so on.
So you mentioned modalities. What modalities do you think will be game changers?
I think gene therapy is clearly at the forefront. I think, we have a lot of challenges to overcome there, both on the safety side, the distribution side. Anything that could get to the CNS, would be very helpful, because a lot of those diseases have a very important CNS component that's not at all addressed by the current treatment landscape. So for me, I feel like that's where there might be the most promise.
Yeah,
You're a drug hunter. What do you think?
No, you go first. No, you go first, please.
we're such a polite panel. No, I totally agree. I think gene therapies are, we need to get much better at capsids. We need to be able to get them into the CNS and all that kind of stuff. But we've also been spending some time looking at protein degradation and the various different types of degradation technologies, which you have to know a lot about the biology to what you have to degrade, and that thing that you degrade is actually going to be impactful. But I think it could be a really interesting modality for certain diseases where we really understand what the pathogenic protein really is.
I think the great thing is there's so many modalities now that look really exciting: gene editing, gene therapy. I am reminded, though, Sharon, we did our first gene therapy deal in 1995. In a company not too far from here, and we did the second gene therapy deal in 1996. And what we said at the time was we were ahead of the game. The truth was we were really dumb. We didn't know the first thing truly about what expression you needed, what delivery you needed, but it got us into the area. If I look at some of the hurdles now to gene therapy, they're exactly the same. It still comes back to expression and delivery. So I do think there's great utility. It's going to take us longer than we hope, unfortunately. Same with gene editing, same with RNA technologies. They're all great. In the meantime, small molecules, antibodies, bispecifics, affibodies are going to do a lot of good in disease. So I wouldn't take our eyes off of those.
I think, the question of durability in gene therapy is a big one. So, kind of a current case for me at BioMarin I cover, and they have a hemophilia A gene therapy that's pending FDA approval. It's been approved actually by the European authorities as of late last year, so it's on the market, rolling out country by country there. But the concern about this, even if it's on the market here, is that the duration of which it will be effective is not completely understood. So we've seen, and that's limited by the fact that the follow-up time from the trials is only so long. We only have so many years of follow-up. We see that the clinical benefits seem to continue pretty robustly in terms of annualized bleed rates and so forth, and these patients are able to stay off getting their infusions of factor VIII. But the endogenous levels of factor VIII produced by the gene therapy, those levels are trending down. So the question is going to be at what point, well, first of all, do they continue to trend down or do they level off? Will there be a point at which they get so low that you actually do see a clinical impact? And that's something we don't know yet. So we were talking about pricing and payers earlier. So the way the payers are dealing with that, or the way they are expected to if this gets approved, is they will effectively pay for what the 5-year value of this gene therapy is, because we have data out till 5 years. So they will say, okay, well, if taking care of a hemophilia A patient would support $500,000 a year for this drug, times 5, that's $2.5 million. And so that's what the payers, this is what the company is telling us, seem to indicate they will pay for this gene therapy. And in fact, the company has entered into an agreement with them that if the patient loses efficacy earlier, they will actually get a prorated money back. So that's how that seems to be lining up for BioMarin.
Yep. What do you think? You run a large, successful research group. What do you think?
There is no modality that we don't want to touch right now. So Alexion Rare Disease works in large molecules, small molecules, medium-sized molecules, enzyme replacement therapies, every different antibody format. siRNA has been very successful for us. mRNA in its first iteration, less successful. There's some bugs to work out. Gene therapy and gene editing are in our portfolio. ASOs are in our portfolio. And every combination of those is in our portfolio. What are we not doing yet? RNA editing, and I think that's potentially very exciting. We have a peptide therapy, but peptide fusions are potentially very exciting. And I think another thing for us to ponder is that creating the cargo is only half the battle. Delivering the cargo is the hard part. And so, as you mentioned earlier, being able to deliver to the CNS, being able to deliver specifically to the tissue of interest, especially with gene therapies, to give yourself a more reasonable therapeutic window, is going to be, I think, our biggest challenge in the coming years. And the companies that can do that well will prevail.
Good for you.
Yeah, we actually have our an objective now to look at delivery technologies for oligos and gene therapy, and just the delivery technology itself, we think will be game-changing and independent of the cargo.
Again, I'm really going to date myself. We did our first collaboration with oligonucleotide chemistry in late 80s, early 90s. Company was then called ISIS. It's now Ionis. And you think of that 20 years, 20 plus years to come up with medicines, well worth it for what they've done. So the new technologies are great. You have to invest the time and the effort. And in that case, the big issue in 1990 was delivery. And it's still a big issue.
So something else I'm thinking about is, obviously there's a ton of innovation across the industry in terms of, technologies and therapeutic approaches. But I think we're also going to need a good amount of improvement on other tools. I'm thinking in particular diagnostics, and that's sequencing, but also transcriptomics, proteomics, all of the omics. The bioassays need to also follow the biomarkers, and I think that something else is preclinical models, because not everything can be de-risked, through clinical trials. And so I think we're going to have to keep monitoring that and make sure that we also support innovation over there.
Totally agree, Sylvia. So I'll share some numbers that I always carry with me because I think they're so meaningful. Martin, you talked about how as hard as science is, it's not nearly as hard as living with the disease. The average rare disease patient takes 4.8 years to get the correct diagnosis, and they will see in the US, on average, 7.3 different specialists before they get the right diagnosis. And during that time, they'll often get the wrong diagnosis and consequently the wrong therapeutic, and sometimes they live with the side effects of those wrong therapeutics for the rest of their lives. So when we think about creating therapeutics for patients with rare disease, at least at my company, we're well aware that that's only half the battle, and that part of our job is creating the diagnostics so that patients get the answers that they need. And we're not doing that to bring them to our therapies. We're doing that because they need to solve the problem for themselves, and we want them to get to the answers they need and the therapeutics that they need. So developing those technologies and then employing those technologies is very, very important to us and to the rare disease community. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Some of them are nuts and bolts assays that help us understand whether or not complement is dysregulated or whether or not phosphate is dysregulated. But because so many of the rare diseases have genetic causality, making more robust genetic tests, understanding all the variants and what they mean, creating those data and making them public, and then using that to ultimately become a screening tool are all things that we are investing in and enabling. And our job there is not to sell these tests, but to make them just broadly available, to place them in the community and make them free to patients who need that. And so I think that's going to be the responsibility of everybody who's working in this space. So one of the things that came up in your commentary was things that small companies can do and things that big companies can do. I'm currently working in a big company, and so we have the advantage of being able to invest in all of these different things. But you also talked about the proving ground for innovation. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between big companies and small companies, you know, what each one can do well, and maybe how the investment community can help those entrepreneurial companies really gain momentum.
I go first. So, you know, I think one thing that small companies can do is that when you look at it from a commercial perspective, what, you know, represents commercial viability for a small company versus big pharma can be quite different. A big pharma, in order to shift the needle on their P&L, is going to need to have very substantial revenues. You know, a small company can get away with a much smaller market opportunity, and so I think there's like a window of opportunity there, and especially in the rare disease space that might be tapped into by smaller companies that, you know, big pharma would kind of like not even take a look at.
Absolutely. I've been on many panels where there's been arguments between a big pharma person and a startup person, and I said at one meeting it was like two bald men fighting over a comb. It's kind of nuts when you think about it. Having worked in big companies, middle company, and now a startup just down the road, you do different things. There's things that big companies do the small company can't do. The resources you have, the wonderful enabling functions, CMC, safety, brilliant scientists at every turn. You can't compare with that, right? But if you're a small company, you can certainly move fast, and you can make decisions fast and hope they're the right decisions, and maybe work on some areas that you can't work. But I wouldn't put them up against each other. There's such a place for both of them to be working together, actually.
I think, Martin, on your point about, you know, big companies can do kind of whatever they want and they have the resource to do that. I think from a public markets perspective, you know, what people are often afraid of with small companies is, you know, how many corners are being cut because of limitations on financial resources, personnel, bandwidth, the like, especially, you know, as there are more and more companies, you know, even the consultants they use are becoming stretched. So, you know, one thing that you tend to see maybe more often with smaller companies than with larger ones is, you know, they say they met with the FDA and they can do one trial, and if they're successful, they'll get approved, and then lo and behold, they do their one trial, and then the FDA says, well, we really meant you should have done 2 trials. And so there's sort of either a misinterpretation or they just did one because they could raise money for one, and, you know, hopefully that would allow them to raise money for a second one. So that's something that we feel, that's kind of the rub we feel, you know, on the public market side.
It definitely happens, but if you're a small company and you're cutting corners, shame on you. absolutely shame on you, because you're dealing with patients' lives and the people that work in the company. When Steve Uden, who's in the audience, and I kicked off Rally Bio, we said at the beginning we were going to do everything properly, right? We were going to bring in CMC, sorry, Sharon. We were going to bring in bioanalytical people, sorry, Sharon. But we were going to bring in folks that really knew how to do it. Your point's right, though. Many companies do cut corners, and it's such a flawed idea. You might have to pay a bit more for the quality, but please do it.
I think one of the caveats, though, of the small company able to take a smaller opportunity forward that maybe a large pharma would think too small, it still costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time, and you've got to be really sure that there's something at the end of it that justifies that kind of investment. Oftentimes, we've embarked on those journeys, and they don't quite lead where you expect. You know, at some level, pharma's got to become involved, and their expertise comes to bear in a variety of ways, not just for large clinical indications, but you know, the small company taking a drug to market in a smaller indication, we just haven't seen that pan out.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, is the smaller companies are really kind of the proving grounds for a lot of the innovative, sort of bleeding edge science and technology, because the big pharmas don't necessarily have the bandwidth and the risk profile to take those things on until they're validated. And it's really the biotech companies that bring that innovation in and really hammer on it and pressure test it and get it to that point where the bigger companies can then say, okay, now I believe this. Now I think I know what I would do with it. And there's either a research collaboration or a license of a program or something like that. At least my experience in the two big pharmas that I was in, they were a little bit risk adverse to those things that really hadn't proven themselves, sometimes clinically, but at least into some sort of preclinical validation where they felt they were comfortable to at least do a research collaboration. And biotechs are very good at that, and they're very good at doing it on a small group of really expert people to really pressure test that. And totally agree with your point, though. If you're a biotech company and cutting corners, you don't have the right board.
Yeah.
So something else I was going to add in the same direction is if you are a very small VC-backed startup, you have to be aware of the fact that as investors, when we're looking at a potential investment, we have to work through the possible exit scenarios. And these days, under the current market conditions, you know, the bar to IPO is relatively high, and so we spend a little bit of extra time trying to put ourselves in the shoes of strategics. In fact, we spend a lot of time talking to strategics to really understand what it is that they care for, what they are interested in, what they're not interested in, what kind of data they want to see. And so, you know, from that perspective, you're back to basically trying to align, you know, your commercial strategy to that of the potential buyers that the company has.
All right, so I think what we heard is you need all of it. that you need small companies and you need big companies. And you mentioned the collaboration between biotechs and mid to large pharma. Having sat on both sides of that, absolutely yes, right? Because that really brings the financial resources and the broader capabilities that you need to drive those ideas forward. And from a scientist perspective, so much fun to work on. I also see in our ecosystem that there are small platform companies that can take on an ultra-rare disease because they can generate proof of concept there. Big pharma won't see a business model there and probably won't develop a therapeutic for that small group of patients. And so the mix of small company interests and large company interests means that more patients will be served at the end of the day. And so the more that we can continue to, you know, build a collaborative and cooperative ecosystem, I think it's best for all of us and for patients.
Completely agree.
So let's talk a little bit about policies. Are there policies that we think are either helping or hindering development in rare disease or discovery and development in rare disease?
We're going to talk about the IRA, aren't we?
Figure we have to touch on that sooner or later.
So I think to me the IRA has had two impacts. On the first most obvious one is I think we see a little bit more interest in the orphan disease space because they're providing, you know, the possibility of being exempt from pricing negotiation if you're pursuing an orphan indication. On the other side of that, they are saying that you need to pursue a single orphan indication. And so I think it was always kind of tricky for companies to think of developing a drug into a rare disease and then expand to common diseases, because from a pricing perspective, that's very challenging. Now what the IRA is doing is that it's becoming difficult to go from one rare disease to expanding into multiple rare diseases. And in my opinion, that's a little bit unfortunate and perhaps a little bit sad, because what's going to happen is there's going to be even more scrutiny on indication selection. Yes. And a bunch of indications that would normally be pursued in parallel are going to be left off the table because they're not commercially viable on their own, and you're probably going to be seeing a lot less of the pipeline and the product type of approaches.
Yeah, I think net IRA for pharmaceutical companies is negative. I think I really worry about this indication piece and going after one indication and not doing it. I think also, and this is too political, but I don't think it addresses the real issues with the healthcare system in the United States. I think it's looking at one little piece of it and doing something which I think may hurt patients. There's many other pieces that need to be looked at, and I'm sure some of you followed the insulin hearings, the state, and it was really quite sad to listen to parts of that, where so many people are involved in the chain of healthcare, and you have something like IRA. So yeah, it worries me a bit. I think it will affect some innovation in some quarters.
Yeah, I think it absolutely will, and I think it is. We're the easiest target to poke at as part of the healthcare expense here in the United States. It's hard to poke at hospitals. It's hard to poke at the fact that they don't put their prices online, and you can buy aspirin from one hospital and it's $50, and you could buy 7 bottles for that, right? So I think we're just the obvious folks that they can go after easily. But I think just even as you look at modalities, right? Why on earth would you give one modality more time before negotiations versus another modality? It's not like small molecules aren't important. It's not like there are targets that only small molecules, at least right now, can be addressed. So why are we punishing small molecules versus anything else? So there's a lot of confusing stuff that, does have a trickle down to impacting how do we think about innovation, how do we think about funding innovation, especially if you can. Small molecules have a shorter lifespan before they could be negotiated, regardless of patent life. And now you're limited in terms of number of indications, where you could then potentially recoup some of that if you don't have as much life, right? It's a really dampening.
One consequence we've seen recently is when small companies come in with a platform. It used to be, as we were discussing earlier, this ultra-orphan or ultra-rare indication is the first stop on a journey to a large market opportunity. And now they come in and have to make the economic case that this first indication is a standalone investable opportunity, and it's really changing the nature of what we're seeing.
Yeah, let me share Alexion's experience and how it would have been changed if the IRA was in place earlier in the company's life. So I work for a company that's based here in New Haven, Boston, and is now global. And before I joined the company, some brilliant scientists created this therapeutic that targets C5 and tested it out in a few different diseases. It failed in a few. And they were able to demonstrate remarkable efficacy in a rare disease called PNH. And then the company built on that success and was again able to demonstrate remarkable efficacy in another rare disease called atypical HUS. Now, if the IRA had existed at the time, they would have been protected for PNH and had minimal protection for the second one. The company then went on and demonstrated transformative efficacy for patients with 2 different diseases, myasthenia gravis and neuromyelitis optica. And you can thank my neighbor here, Martin, for being able to pilot us through the challenges of that development and regulatory pathway. Had the IRA been enacted at that time, we never would have developed the drug because there would have been no protections, and those patients would not have been served. And to make it very real for all of you, patients with NMO can go blind overnight. Yep. They can go blind in one eye, and then they're just waiting to understand if they're going to lose the rest of their vision. They have the option of taking a therapeutic that gives 0 relapses. It preserves their vision, it preserves their quality of life, but we wouldn't have been able to afford to develop the drug in that indication. So I think the way that this policy is currently structured is difficult for pharma. It's terrible for rare disease patients.
Yes.
And with that, I'm seeing the wind it up symbol, because I told you all that we were the last thing between you and awards and cocktails, and now we're entertaining ourselves and stopping you from getting to the cocktails. So please join me in thanking these wonderful panelists.
Thank you.